Hi, everybody. This is Allison from Alley Cat Creations. How are you? Please like, share, and subscribe to my channel if you have yet to do so. And if you get anything from my work, a mind explosion, a new book to read, a new author to explore, please consider supporting my work. All the links are at the bottom of the description. Alley Cat Creations211 is my website. That's where you can see all these fantastic pieces, pyramids, and all kinds of fun stuff. So go check that out. And if you are interested in purchasing anything, please email me. I do everything privately. And channel memberships, it's one tier for right now. I'm boggling my head to thinking moving on up. We'll see. But it's one tier right now. And with that, you get free entries into any one of my raffles. I do raffles once a month. And I got some people that won some pyramids and some paint and sip paintings. Um, and I have 3 place winners. So it's a really fun Friday Night Live. Is usually when I do the raffle. They're really fun. I have a beautiful community of amazing souls that are super open-minded and very loving and healing. So come and join us there. Also, I do channel member only oracle readings for the collective of everybody in the membership. And I do that once a week. Because time right now, even though it is non-existence, it exists in our brains in linear space. So yeah. Coffee is a must. Long day, long day. But today we're gonna do Blavatsky. If my allergies don't kill me first. The Third Eye. This is still stanza 10, and we're probably going to have to do another one because this stanza is ridiculously long. And I'm not overwhelming anybody with a 3-hour video. Just no, I can't even do that. The races with the third eye. Third eye. Third eye. The subject is so unusual. The paths pursued so intricate, so full of dangerous pitfalls prepared by adverse theories and criticism, that good reason have to be given for every step taken, while turning the light of the bull's eye, called esotericism, on almost every inch of the occult grounds traveled over, we have also to use its lens to throw into stronger objectivity the regions explored by exact science. This, not only in order to contrast the two, but to defend our position. It may be complained by some that too little is said of the physical human side of the extinct races in this history of their growth and evolution. Much more might be said, assuredly, if simple prudence did not make us hesitate at the threshold of every new revelation. That which finds its possibility and landmarks in the discoveries of modern science is given, all that of which exact knowledge knows nothing, and upon which it is unable to speculate and therefore denies as facts in nature, is withheld. But even such statements as these, that of all the mammalians man was the earliest, that it is man who is the indirect ancestor of the ape, and that he was a kind of cyclops in the days of old, with all be contested. Yet scientists will never be able to prove, except to their own satisfaction, that it was not so, nor could they admit the first 2 races of men were too etherical and phantom-like in their constitution, organism, and shape, even to be called physical man. For if they do, it will be found that this is one of the reasons why their relics can never be expected to be exhumed among other fossils. Nevertheless, all this is maintained. Man was the storehouse, so to speak, of all the seeds of life for this round, the vegetable and animal alike, as Ein Sof is one notwithstanding the innumerable forms which are in him, Zohar, so is man on earth the microcosm of the macrocosm. As soon as man appeared, everything was complete, for everything is comprised in man. He unites in himself all forms. The mystery of the earthly man is after the mystery of the heavenly man. The human form, so called because it is the vehicle, under whatever shape, of the divine man is so intuitionally remarked by the author of esoteric studies, the new type at the beginning of every round. As man never can be, so he never has been manifested in a shape belonging to the animal kingdom in S. The author proceeds, he never formed part of that kingdom, only derived from the most finished class of the latter. A new human form must always have been the new type of the cycle. The human shape in one ring, as I imagine, becomes cast off clothes in the next. It is then appropriated by the highest order in the servant kingdom below. If the idea was we understand it to mean, for the rings spoken of thrown some confusion upon it, then it is the correct esoteric teaching. Having appeared at the very beginning, and at the head of sentient and conscious life, man, the astral or the soul, for the Zohar, repeating the archaic teaching, distinctly says that the real man is the soul, and his material frame no part of him. Man became the living and animal unit from which the cast-off clothes determine the shape of every life and animal in this round. Thus he created for ages the insects, reptiles, birds, and animals unconsciously to himself, from his remains and relics from the third and fourth rounds. The same idea and teaching are distinctly given in the Vendada of the Mazadins, as they are in the Chaldean and the Mosaic allegory of the Ark, all of which are the many national versions, the original legend given in Hindu scriptures. It is found in the allegory of Vasvat Manu. I am not pronouncing his name right, as we all know that, and his ark with the seven rishis, as that of the rishis, each of whom is shown the father, progenitor of specified animals, reptiles, and even monsters. Open the Mazian Vedada at Fargad at verse 27 and read the command of Orzmand to Yima, a spirit of the earth, who symbolizes the three races after telling him to build a Vara, an enclosure. Thither into the Vara thou shalt bring the seeds of men and women of the greatest, best, and finest kinds on this earth. Thither thou shalt bring the seeds of every kind of cattle. All those seeds shalt thou bring, two of every kind, to be kept inexhaustible there, so long as those men shall stay in the Vara. Those men in the Vara are the progenitors, the heavenly man or Dhyani, the future egos who are commissioned to inform mankind, for Vara or the ark, or again the vehicle, simply means man. Verse 30 says, thou shalt seal up the Vara after filling it up with the seeds, and thou shalt make a door and a window, self-shining within, which is the soul. And when Yima inquires of Ahura Mazda how he shall manage to make that Vara, he answered, crush the earth and knead it with thy hands as the potter does when kneading the potter's clay. The Egyptian ram head god makes man of clay on a potter's wheel, and so in Genesis do the Elohim fashion him out of the same material. When the maker of the material world, Ahura Mazda, is asked further what is to give light to the Vara which Yima made, he told that there are uncreated lights and created lights, and that there in Ariana Vago, where Vara is built, the stars, the moon, and the sun are only once a year seen to rise and set, and a year seems only as a day and night, a clear reference to the land of the gods, or the now polar regions. Moreover, another hint is contained in this verse, a distinct allusion to the uncreated lights which enlighten man within his principles. Otherwise, no sense or reason would be found in Ahura Mazda's answer. That was so New York. Answer, which is forthwith followed by verse 41, saying that every 40th year to every couple, hermaphrodite, two are born, a male and a female, the later being a distant echo of the secret doctrine of the stanza which says, at the expiration date of every 40 annual suns, at the end of every 40th day, the double one becomes four, male and female in one, and the first and the second and the third. Which is clear, since every sun meant a whole year, the latter being composed of one day. Then, as in the Arctic circle, Arctic circle, it is now composed of 6 months. According to the old teachings, the axis of the earth gradually changes its inclination to the ecliptic, and at the period referred to, this inclination was such that a polar day lasted during the whole period of the earth's revolution about the sun, when a kind of twilight of every short duration intervened, after which the polar land resumed its position directly under the solar rays. This may be contrary to astronomy as now taught and understood, but who can say that changes in the motion of the earth, which do not take place now, did not occur millions of years back? Returning once more to the statement that Vara meant the man of the fourth round, as much as the earth of those days, the moon, and even Noah's Ark, if one will so have it, this is again shown in the dialogue between the Ahura Mazda and Zarathustra. Thus, when the latter asks, O maker of the material world, thou Holy One, who is he who brought the law of Mazda into the Vara which Yima made? Ahura Mazda answered, it was the bird Karishshipta, O holy Zarathustra. The bird Karishshipta, I'm not saying that right, dwells in the heavens, where he living on the earth, he would be king of birds. He brought into the Var of Yima and recites the Avesta in the language of birds. This again is an allegory and a symbol misunderstood by the Orientalists only, who see in this bird an incarnation of lightning and say its song was often thought to be the utterance of a god in a revelation and whatnot. Karshipta is the human mind soul, and the deity thereof symbolized in ancient Magianism by a bird. I don't know how to pronounce that. Maganian? Yeah, no, we're not going there. As the Greeks symbolized it by a butterfly. No sooner had Karshipta entered the Vara or man than he understood the law of Mazda or divine wisdom. In the book of Concealed Mystery, it is said of the tree, which is the tree of knowledge of good and evil. In its branches of the tree, the birds lodge and build their nests, or the souls and the angels have their place. Therefore, with the Kabbalists, it was like a symbol. Bird was a Chaldean, and he has become a Hebrew synonym and synonym for an angel, a soul, a spirit, or a diva. And the bird's nest was both heaven and is God's bosom in the Zohar. The perfect Messiah enters Eden into that place which calls the bird's nest. like a bird that is flying from its nest, and that is the soul from which the my mouth ain't working today. I can usually get that one out. Divine wisdom or grace does not move away. The nest of the eternal bird, the flutter of whose wings produces life, is boundless space, says the commentary, meaning Hansa, the bird of wisdom. It is Adam Kadmon, who is the Sitharothal tree, and is he who becomes the tree of knowledge of good and evil esoterically. And that tree hath around it 7 columns, 7 pillars of the world, or rectors, the same progenitors or Sitharoth, again operating through the respective orders of angels in the spheres of the 7 planets, one of which orders begets giants, Nephilim, on earth. It was the belief of entire antiquity, pagan and Christian, that the earliest mankind was a race of giants. Certain excavations in America, in the mounds and in caves, have already yielded, in isolated cases, groups of skeletons of 9 and 12 feet high. These belong to tribes of the early 5th race, now degenerated to an average size of between 5 and 6 feet. But we can easily believe that the Titans and Cyclops of old really belonged to the 4th Atlantean race, and that all the subsequent legends and allegories found in the Hindu Puranas and the Greek Hesiod and Homer were based on hazy reminiscence of real Titans, men of a superhuman, tremendous physical power, which enabled them to defend themselves and hold at bay the gigantic monsters of the Messianic and early Synzotic times, and of actual Cyclops, 3-eyed mortals. It has been often remarked by observant writers that the origin of nearly every popular myth and legend could be traced invariably to a fact in nature. In these fantastic creations of exuberant subjectivism, there is always an element of an objective and real. The imagination of the masses, disorderly and ill-regulated as it may be, could never have conceived and fabricated ex nihilo so many monstrous figures, such a wealth of extraordinary tales, had it not had to serve it as a central nucleus. These floating reminiscences, obscured and vague, which unite the broken links of the chain of time to form them the mysterious dream foundation of our collective consciousness. Like I said, we create our reality. So some of the things that you create in your brain is often another parallel dimensional space that is existing right now. Many worlds interpretation. The evidence for Cyclops, a race of giants, will be pointed out in forthcoming selections. In the Cyclopean remnants, so called to this day, an indication that during its evolution and before the final adjustment of the human organism, which became perfect and symmetrical only in the 5th race, the early 4th race may have been 3-eyed, without having necessarily a 3rd eye in the middle of the brow, like the legendary Cyclops, is also furnished by science. To the occultists who believe that spiritual and psychic involution proceeds on parallel lines with physical evolution, that the inner senses innate in the first human races, anthropod, during racial growth and the material development of the outer senses, to the student of esoteric symbology, finally, this statement is no conjecture or a possibility, but simply a phase of the law of growth, a proven fact, in short. They understand the meaning of this passage in the commentaries, which says, there were 4-armed human creatures in those early days of the male-females hermaphrodites, with 1 head, yet 3 eyes. They could see before them and behind them. A Kapla, later, after the separation of the sexes, man having fallen into matter, their spiritual vision became dim. Incoordinately, the third eye commenced to lose its power. When the fourth race arrived at its middle age, the inner vision had to be awakened and acquired by artificial stimuli, the process of which was known to the old sages. The third eye, likewise, getting gradually petrified, soon disappeared. The double face became the one face, and the eye was drawn deep into the head and now buried under the hair. During the activity of the inner man, during trances and spiritual visions, the eye swells and expands. The ahat sees and feels it and regulates his action accordingly. The undefiled Lano, disciple Chila, need fear no danger. He who keeps himself not in purity, who is not chaste, will receive no help from the Deva eye. Unfortunately not. The Deva eye exists no more for the majority of mankind. The third eye is dead and acts no longer, but it has left behind a witness to its existence. The witness is now the pineal gland. As for the four-armed men, it is they who become the prototypes of the four-armed Hindu gods, as shown in preceding footnote. Such is the mystery of the human eye that in their vain endeavors to explain and account for all the difficulties surrounding its action, some scientists have been forced to resort to occult explanations. The development of the human eye gives more support to the occult anthropology than to that of the materialistic physiologists. The eyes in the human embryo grow from within, without, out of the brain instead of being a part of the skin, as in the insects and the cuttlefish. Professor Langston, thinking the brain a queer place for the eye and attempting to explain the phenomenon on Darwinian lines, suggests a curious view that our earliest vertebrate ancestor was a transparent creature and hence did not mind where the eye was. And so was man a transparent creature. Once upon a time, we are taught, hence our theory holds good. But now, how does the Langston hypothesis square with the Haecklerian view that the vertebrate eye originated by changes in the dermis? If it started inside, the theory goes into the wastebasket. This seems to be proved by embryology. Moreover, Professor Langston's extraordinary suggestion, or shall we say admission, is rendered perhaps necessary by evolutionist necessities. Occultism, with its teachings as to the gradual development of senses from within, without, from astral prototypes, is far more satisfactory. The third eye retreated inwards when its course was run around point in favor of occultism. The allegory expressed of the Hindu mysteries, when speaking of the eye of Siva, the Tribhakana, the third eye, thus receives its justification and reason d'etre, the transference of the pineal gland once that third eye to the forehead, being an exoteric license. This throws also a light on the mystery, incomprehensible to some, of the connection between abnormal or spiritual seership and the physiological purity of the seer. The question is often asked, why should celibacy and chastity be a sine qua non rule and condition of regular chelaship, or the development of psychic and occult powers? The answer is contained in the commentary. When we learn that the third eye was once a physiological organ, and that later on, owing to the gradual disappearance of spirituality and increase in materiality, spiritual nature being extinguished by the physical, it became an arthropod organ, as little understood now by the physiologists as the spleen is. When we learn this, the connection will become clear. During human life, the greatest impediment in the way of spiritual development, and especially to the acquirement of yoga powers, is the activity of our physiological senses, sexual action being closely connected by interaction with the spinal cord and the gray matter of the brain. It is useless to give any longer explanation. Of course, the normal and abnormal state of the brain and the degree of active work in the medulla oblongata reacts powerfully on the pineal gland, for owing to the number of centers in that region, which controls by far the greater majority of the physiological actions of the animal economy, and also owing to the close and intimate neighborhood of the twos, there must be exerted a very powerful inductive action by the medulla on the pineal gland. All this is quite plain to the occultist, but it is very vague in the sight of the general reader. The latter must then be shown the possibility of a three-eyed man in nature, in those periods when his formation was yet in a comparatively chaotic state. Such a possibility may be inferred from anatomical and zoological knowledge, first of all, then it may rest on the assumptions of materialistic science itself. It is asserted upon the authority of science and upon evidence, which is not merely a fiction or theoretical speculation this time, that many of the animals, especially among the lower orders of the vertebrata, have a third eye, now atrophied, but necessarily active in its origin. The Hirata species of lizard of the order Lactilia, recently discovered in New Zealand, a part of ancient Lemuria, so-called Mark Well, presents a peculiarity, can never get that word out, in a most extraordinary manner. And not only the Hirata punctata, but the chameleon, certain reptiles, and even fishes. It was thought at first that it was no more than the prolongation of the brain ending with a small protuberance called epiphysis. I don't know how to say that. A little bone separated from the main bone by a cartilage and found in every animal. But it was soon found to be more than this. It offered as a development and anatomical structure showed such an analogy with that of the eye that it was found impossible to see it in anything else. There were and are paleontologists who feel convinced to this day that the third eye has function in the origin, and they certainly right, for this is what it said of the pineal gland in Quain's anatomy. It is from this part constituting at first the whole and subsequently the hinder part of the anterior primary encephalopathic vessel that the optic vessels are developed in the earliest period, and the forepart is that in connection with which the cerebral hemispheres and accompanying parts are formed. The thalamus, opticus, maybe, of each side is formed by a lateral thickening of the medullary wall, while the interval between descending towards the base constitutes the cavity of the third ventricle, which its prolongation in the infundibula. I wish my mouth would work. It's pissing me off. The gray commissure afterwards stretches across a ventricular cavity. The hinder part of the roof is developed by a peculiar process to be noticed later into the pineal gland, which remains united on each side by its pedicles to the thalamus, and behind this a transverse band is formed as a posterior commissure. I'm totally I'm going to tell you guys right now that let's just pause right here. I did take anatomy in college because I had to draw skeletons and all kinds of stuff. There is no way even back then that my mouth, and I had this bridge forever, but when it was attached, could I ever get these words out? And it's worse now. So I do apologize. I'm not trying to look stupid. The lamina terminalis continues to close the third ventricle in the front. Below it, the optical commensure forms the floor of the ventricle, and further back, the infundulium descends to be united in the sella tertia with the tissue adjoining the posterior lobe of the pituitary body. The two optic thalami formed from the posterior and outer part of the anterior vesicle consisted at first of a single hollow sac of nervous matter, the cavity of which communicates on each side in the front with that of the commencing cerebra hemispheres, and behind with that of the middle cephalic vesicle. Soon, however, by increased deposit taking place in their interior behind below, and at the sides, the thalami become solid, and at the time a cleft or a fissure appears between them above and penetrates down into the internal cavity, which continues open at the back part opposite the entrance of the Sullivan aqueduct. This cleft or fissure is the third ventricle. Behind the two thalami continue united by the posterior commissure, which is distinguishable about the end of the third month, and also by the pedicles of the pituitary, of the pineal gland. At the early period of the optic tracts, many may be recognized as hollow prolongations from the outer part of the wall of the thalami, while they are still vascular. At the fourth month, these tracts are distinctly formed. They subsequently are prolonged backwards into the connection with the corpora quadrigemina. The formation of the pineal gland and pituitary body presents some of the most interesting phenomena which are connected with the development of the, I'm not going to even attempt that. It's like one of those drug prescription names. The above is specific, is my brain. The above is especially interesting when it is remembered that, were it not for the development of the hinder part of the cerebral hemispheres backwards, the pineal gland would be perfectly visible on the removal of the radial bones. It is very interesting also to note the obvious connection to be traced between the originally hollow optic tracts and the eyes anteriorly. The pineal gland and its pendungu, I don't know how to say that, behind, and all of these were the optic thalami, so that the recent discoveries in connection with the third eye of Heratia punctata have a very important bearing on the development history of the human senses and on the occult assertions in the text. It is well known and also regarded as fiction now by those who have ceased to believe in the existence of an immortal principle in man, that Descartes saw in the pineal gland the seat of the soul. Although it is joined to every part of the body, he said, there is one special portion of it in which the soul exercises its functions more especially than in any other. And as neither the heart nor yet the brain could be that special locality, he concluded that it was that little gland tied to the brain, yet having an action independent of it, as it could easily be put into a kind of swing motion by the animal spirits, which cross the cavities of the skull in every sense. Unscientific as this may appear in our day of exact learning, Descartes was yet far nearer the occult truth than in any Haeckel, for the pineal gland, as shown, is far more connected with soul and spirit than with the physiological senses of man. Having had the leading scientists a glimmer of the real process employed by the evolutionary impulse and the winding cyclic course of this great law, they would know instead of conjecturing and feel as certain of the future physical transformations of the humankind by the knowledge of its past forms. Then would they see the fallacy and all the absurdity of their modern blind force and mechanical process of nature, realizing in consequence of such knowledge that the said pineal gland, for instance, could not but be disabled for physical use at the stage of our cycle. If the odd eye in man is now atrophied, it is a proof that as in the lower animal it has once been active, for nature never creates the smallest, the most insignificant form without being definite purpose and use. It was an active organ, we say, at the stage of evolution when the spiritual element in man reigned supreme over the hardly nascent intellectual and psychic elements. And as the cycle ran down toward the point when the physiological senses were developed by and went par passe with the growth and consolidation of the physical man, the intermediable and complex vicissitudes and tribulations of the zoological development, that median eye, ended by atrophying, along with the early spiritual and purely psychic characteristics in man. The eye is the mirror and also the window of the soul, says popular wisdom. In the beginning, every class and family of living species were hermaphrodite and objectively one eye. In the animal whose form was an etherical astrally as that of man, before the bodies of both began to evolve their coats of skin, to evolve from within, without, the thick coating of physical substance or matter, with its internal physiological mechanism, the third eye, was primarily, as in man, the only seeing organ. The two physical front eyes develop later on in both brute and man, whose organ of physical sight was, at the commencement of the third race, in the same position as that of some of the blind vertebrata in our day, beneath an opaque skin. Only the stages of the odd or primeval eye in man and brute are now inverted, as the former has already passed that animal non-rational stage in the third round. And it's ahead of more brute creation by a whole plane of consciousness. Therefore, while the cyclopean eye was and still is in man the organ of spiritual sight, in the animal it was that of objective vision. And this eye, having performed its function, was replaced in the course of physical evolution from the simple to the complex by two eyes, and thus was stored and laid aside by nature for further use in aeons to come. This explains why the pineal gland reached its highest development proportionately with the lowest physical development. It is the vertebra in which it is the most prominent and objective in man. It is most carefully hidden and inaccessible except to the autonomous. No less light is thrown thereby on the future physical, spiritual, and intellectual state of mankind in periods corresponding on parallel lines with other past periods, and always on the lines of ascending and descending cyclic evolution and development. Thus, a few centuries before the Kali Yuga, the Black Age, which began nearly 5,000 years ago, it was said, paraphrased into comprehensible sentences, we, the fifth root race in our first half of duration onward, on the now ascending arc of the cycle, are on the midpoint of or between the first and the second races, falling downward. The races were then on the descending arc of the cycle. Calculate for thyself, Lano, and see. Calculating and advise, we find the duration, that transitional period, namely in the second half of the first spiritual, ethereal, astral race. Nascent mankind was devoid of the intellectual brain element, as it was on its descending line, and as we are on a parallel to it on the ascending, we, therefore, devoid of the spiritual element, which is now replaced by the intellectual. For remember well, as we are in the Manasa period of our cycle of races, or in the fifth, We have therefore crossed the meridian point of the perfect adjustment of spiritual and matter, or in the equilibrium between brain, intellect, and spiritual perception. One important point has, however, to be borne in mind. We are only in the fourth round, and it is the fifth, that the full development of manas, as a direct ray from the universal Mahat, a ray unimpeded by matter, will be finally reached. Nevertheless, as every subrace and nation have their cycles and stages of development, evolution repeated on a smaller scale, it must be the more so in the case of a root race. Our race then has, as a root race, caused and crossed the equatorial line and is cycling onward on the spiritual side. But some of our sub-races still find themselves on the shadowy descending arc of their respective national cycles, while others, again, the oldest, having crossed their crucial point, which alone decides whether a race, a nation, or a tribe will live or perish, are at the apex of spiritual development as sub-races. It becomes comprehensible now why the odd eye has been gradually transformed into a simple gland after the physical fall of those who have agreed to call the Lemurians. Interesting here. It is a curious fact that it is, especially in human beings, that the cerebral hemispheres and the lateral ventricles have been developed, and the optic thalmi, corpora quadrigemina, and corpora stramnia are the principal parts which are developed in the mammalian brain. Moreover, it is asserted that the intellect of any man may, to some extent, be gouged by the development of the central convulsions and the fore part of the cerebral hemisphere. It would seem a natural corollary that if the development and increased size of the pineal gland may be considered to be an index of the astral capacities and spiritual proclivities of any man, there will be a corresponding development of that part of the cranium, or an increase in the size of the pineal gland at the expense of the hinder part of the cerebral hemispheres. It is a curious speculation, which would receive a confirmation in this case. We would see below and behind the cerebellum, which has been held to be the seat of all the animal proclivities of a human being, and which is allowed by science to be the great center for all the physiological coordinated movements of the body, such as walking, eating. In front, the forepart of the brain, the cerebral hemispheres, the part especially connected with the development of the intellectual powers in man, and in the middle, dominating them both, and especially the animal functions, the developed pineal gland, in connection with the more highly evolved or spiritual man. It must be remembered that these are only physical correspondences, just as the ordinary human brain is the registering organ of memory, but not memory itself. This is then the organ which gave rise to so many legends and traditions, among others to that of man, with one head but two faces. This may be found in several Chinese works, besides being referred to in the Chaldean fragments. Apart from the work already cited, the Shanghai King, compiled by King Sha from engravings on 9 urns made 2255 BC by the Emperor Yu. They may be found in other work called the Bamboo Books, and in the third one, the Raya, initiated according to the tradition by Shao Kung, uncle of Wu Wang, the first emperor of the Chao dynasty, BC 1122, says Mr. Shi Gaud in his mythical monsters. The Bamboo Books contain the ancient annals of China, found in AD 279 at the opening of the grave of King Xin of Hua, who died BC 295. Both these works mention men with two faces on one head, one in the front and one behind. Now that which the students of occultism ought to know, that the third eye is inseparably connected with karma. The tenet is so mysterious that the very few have heard of it. And just a pause here really quick. There was a man, seriously, with two faces, one in the front and one in the back. So that is a real thing. That was a real person. And it's in like the Guinness World Book of Records, I think. And that other thing, there's like we'll go with that book, but there's other things that believe it or not, Ripley's Believe It or Not. There we go. It came to my brain. Um there right there, it might be an anomaly. It might be, some abnormality that happened, but it came to be. So where did that abnormality come from if just a thought. The Aya Siva did not become entirely atrophied before the close of the fourth race, when spiritually and all the divine powers and attributes of the Deva man of the third had been made the handmaidens of the newly awakened physiological and psychic passions of the physical man. Instead of the reverse, the eye lost its power. But such was the law of evolution, and it was, in strict accuracy, no fall. The sin was not in using those newly developed powers, but in misusing them, in making of the tabernacle designed to contain a God, the fane of every spiritual inequity. And if we say sin, it is merely that everyone should understand our meaning as the term karma would be the right one in use in this case, while the reader would feel perplexed at the use of the term spiritual instead of physical. In inequity is reminded of the fact that there can be no physical inequity. The body is simply the irresponsible organ, the tool of the psychic, if not of the spiritual man. While in the case of the Atlanteans, it was precisely the spiritual being which sinned, the spirit element being still the master principle in man. Those days, thus it is in those days that the heaviest karma of the fifth race was generated by our monads. As the sentence may again be found puzzling, it is better than it should be explained for the benefit of those who are ignorant of the Theosophical teachings. I am going to leave us here because then it's going to go into a whole big monadic extravaganza of confusion for so many people who don't know what a monad is. So, even though it's explained in book one, fun times. Sorry, it is allergy season and my nose is a runny faucet. Fun times. Sending each and every one of you love, light, compassion, grace, shielding, and protective energy. Please go within. Be the shoulder. Be the lighthouse. Seed your truths. Go check out all the ways you can help me. That would be amazing. And this hopefully will get concluded, I think, hopefully next time I read. But this is a big stanza, and breaking it up into the topics is probably my best route. I don't want to get anybody lost, and it's already a losing sense to most. So I hope you all have a blessed and beautiful day. Please light the path forward, and I hope to see you on the next one. Bye for now.